for you.
Order. Well, I did not make the comments.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with a panel of bloggers and opinion shapers. Joining me tonight, here's an author, a blogger and a political commentator, Chris Trotter, and he is a journalist and editor of the Daily Blog Live, Selwyn Manning. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, how does David Cunliffe's shadow cabinet rate? Issue 2, latest polling shows John Key needs new coalition friends. Who will they be? And issue 3 tonight, Auckland local elections. What can we expect as the issues? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word. But let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. David Cunliffe has announced his new shadow cabinet, and it's a daring mix of rewarding those who have supported him, making peace with those who are against him, and throwing some into eternal damnation. Selwyn, biggest winners in Cunliffe's shadow cabinet?
Well, I think the voting public that has been waiting for an answer are the biggest winners in this whole affair, really. But certainly to underscore some of the big standout moves, I think David Cunliffe taking on regional development, tag teaming there with his new finance spokesperson, David Parker, that's an impressive role. You've got economic development going to Shane Jones. Now that's an extension to make sure that those that once supported, obviously those in the Backbone Club, but certainly those that saw credence to his message, Shane Jones's message in the campaign, were acknowledged. But to me, you know, there are big vulnerabilities in the National Party's rollout, and those are, for example, in the economics area, in particular relating to the manufacturing sector and how that manufacturing sector gets its product or etc. offshore to the best markets. New Zealand is failing in that area. We're exporting commodity, raw commodity, in big numbers, and there's been an increase in that, but there is no manufacturing for a value-added export base to New Zealand's economy here. Cunliffe and Parker, they tag teamed on exactly those issues, came up with solutions. I get a sense that they have a plan.
Sue Moroney, Louisa Wall, Moana Maki, all big winners?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and that's to me, that is a signal too of a unified Labour caucus in a sense coming through, where you've got women with strong progressive views on how women can engage, but also for the whole of New Zealand, how it can engage, and they're right up there and being acknowledged. There are also those that are down below the bar now without a ranking.
We'll
that's interesting too.
We'll get into them in a second. Chris Hipkins, Annette King, quite magnanimous.
Yeah, no, this is this wonderful word of meritocracy. Well, on the basis of their merit, they have been elevated up into areas where they should be. Look at Chris. Look at what he has been doing in education. He is a star as far as that's concerned. Cunliffe has put those kind of things where people in some areas were saying there will be a vindictive element here. Nonsense. Yep. He's looked at it, thought they're doing the job, they've got the guts to do that job, and let's put them in the right places.
Chris, biggest losers in the reshuffle?
Well, Claire Curran will be nursing her bruises, obviously. Trevor Mallard has received an unmistakable hint, as has Phil Goff, I suspect. He has held on to trade and defence, but in one of the more generous and I think insightful moves that Cunliffe made in choosing his shadow cabinet, he's given the foreign affairs portfolio to David Shearer. Now, that was a very magnanimous thing to do, and it plays to Shearer's greatest strength. Yep. And it may be the making of Shearer. I hope it is, because if ever a man was promoted beyond his capabilities, it was Mr. Shearer. And I think the people who did that to him did him no favours, really. Mind you, he was willing to be promoted, I suppose. But the other losers, well, Darian Fenton has plummeted and lost her Labour portfolio, which has gone to Andrew Little. I think that's a very sound decision on Cunliffe's part, although It does worry me a little that Andrew Little is a lawyer, and Cunliffe has been talking about the sort of reforms which the CTU has been promoting consistently for the last year or so. This is a very unwieldy, a very top-down set of, quote, solutions, unquote, to labour relations in New Zealand, which frankly I don't think is going to work. The fact that Andrew's now been given this, I hope doesn't mean that David Cunliffe thinks that responding to the support he got from the unions simply means yet another set of bureaucratic fixes. I think
Has to be more than that.
labour relations really needs some blue sky thinking. And I think welfare does as well. Because if Labour simply does the same sort of things that it's been doing for the last 10, 15 years, then it really can't expect much in the way of different results. I think it needs to be much bolder there. But, you know, there hasn't been that much in the way of bloodletting, which shows, more than anything else, Cunliffe's confidence. Here is a man who wanted the job, who fought for the job, who defeated every contender for the job, and now he's got the job, and now he wants to be Prime Minister. And that kind of confidence and that kind of single-mindedness is what turns populations towards one party or another. And the recent polls suggest that it's turning rapidly to Cunliffe's Labour Party.
Selwyn, what does the reshuffle tell us about Cunliffe's priorities as leader?
Oh, he knows exactly what kind of party in the first instance he's going to roll out. We are seeing the evidence of that. We are getting a sense of what the Labour Party brand is. He is not going after those that may be his friends after the next election, but he has put up the demarcation lines of his territory very, very strongly and for all to see. I think there is a mark in his leadership where the Greens have responded by getting back to their knitting, that they are working, for example, the Rui Taniwha issue. They're working the conservation issues. They're working the environmental impact issues. That's good Green Party politics, and that suggests how strong the Cunliffe Labour Party is. I'll give one little other thing there too. Chris mentioned the merits of, or otherwise, of David Shearer being given Foreign Affairs. He's yet to prove himself in that, and I thought it was quite a generous position. I thought maybe that Labour could create a brand around New Zealand Aid again and set Shearer loose in that area. But look at the signals here beyond that. What it does signal is New Zealand under Labour will position itself stronger as an independent, honest broker on the world stage that underscores multilateralism and peacekeeping.
And
David
not exchange to
Shearer is
America.
the poster man of that
absolutely.
ethos.
Yeah.
That is strikingly different to where we have been tracking as a sycophantic nation on the
absolutely.
coattails of the
And
United States.
if we want that position at the head of the Security Council, if there's a victory for Labour in 2014 and Cunliffe is our Foreign Minister, then he will have much more success in selling the idea of New Zealand as chair of the Security Council than Mr. Key is currently.
Chris, are the ABCs a broken force now, or will they return from the political grave?
I think they have been defeated in a decisive engagement with Cunliffe. They've been defeated by the people that they have been setting their faces against for a very long time. Isn't just David Cunliffe and his followers, but the party itself. The ringing phrase that echoed out of last year's annual conference was Len Richards' passionate, "We're taking our party back." When they elected David Cunliffe, they made good on that promise. And the situation is now profoundly different. It's not just a matter now of regrouping inside a caucus, twisting arms, calling in old favours, and maybe running someone against Cunliffe, you know, in the event of an election loss, which the mainstream political commentators still seem to think is a possibility.
No.
That doesn't happen anymore. You have to win the party.
Exactly. That's the whole thing. There is a try aspect to this. It's 3 legs to it. That's solid leadership when the leadership is delivering for those, and it is.
Final question to both of you on this. Who should be dusting off their CV?
I see that Fran O'Sullivan has been pointing to Matthew Hooton's CV a fair bit over the social media. So maybe there needs to be a re-evaluation of the accuracy in Matthew's CV.
Who needs to be dusting off their CV?
Oh, well, if I can channel Oliver Cromwell in relation to Trevor Mallard, you have sat here too long for any good that you have been doing lately. In the name of God.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with our second issue tonight. And polling this week shows Labour under Cunliffe have soared up 6.8% to 37.7%. National have dropped to 43.7%. And it has exposed National's weakness of not having any actual coalition partners. Chris, before we get into No Mates National, 6.8% jump after 2 weeks as leader. Cunliffe has done more for Labour in a fortnight than David Shearer managed in 20 bloody months. Does this, more than anything, force some type of answers from the ABCs over why they stymied Cunliffe for so long?
Well, it's certainly a very emphatic rebuttal to the ABCs, if any was required beyond the judgment of the party itself. Let's not forget, however, that the person who holds the record for the single biggest jump is Don Brash.
That's right.
Who in a single bound took his party from the 20s, I think, to the 40s, or pretty close to it.
17-point jump.
17 points, unprecedented.
On the
in
basis of
Colmar
a
punting.
speech.
Yeah.
Yes, this was the famous or infamous, depending upon your point of view, Orewa speech. So it's a very sturdy first poll for David Cunliffe, but I don't think he'll feel relaxed until there's a 4 in front of
right.
You need that trend set.
Yeah.
And every wise head will be saying, how do we make sure there is a momentum here? Just on that, you know, if you look at this type of thing, it's the public opinion, which is the most important, isn't it, is like a vessel tied up to a wharf. When it's tied up to that wharf, it's tied up to the incumbent. But when it starts to leave that wharf, you know that that vessel is going somewhere. And it seems like Labour, under David Cunliffe, has unhinged it from that wharf. So there's a lot to get that going in the right
speed at
direction.
which it has happened indicates that the country was frustrated, deeply
absolutely.
frustrated by Labour's failure to choose one of its number capable of living up to what the electorate was seeking.
Before this, when we started seeing adjustments during the campaign, distant snippets of mood coming out of the country, it was like there was a block of hope that once the hope was realised, then that would transfer into support. And I think that's the key on this.
If ACT, United Future and the Māori Party look like they can't provide National with the numbers, at what stage does John Key go and have a hot Milo with Colin Craig and Rodney?
Oh, I think, you know, the Conservatives are definitely on the strategist radar. They'll be working that and the various scenarios that this play in the game. You know, they'll be working out, okay, if we basically pull back our engagement in a particular electorate up in the north of Auckland and allow the Conservatives to come in, what are we going to get for our buck there? Then they'll play the other alternative scenarios out. I think they'll still have a cup of tea with John Banks or someone in Epsom. You know, they could put up a dog there as long as there's a nod and a wink. That dog, well, some say that they did put up. But, you know, there will be a result in their favour. So, you know, there's a lot there, but the numbers are not stacking up in their favour to get over the line.
Chris, does Winston suddenly become the new best friend of John Key's? And if John Tamahiri is serious about joining New Zealand First, could they work as a coalition partner for National?
Well, I've always been of the view that should Winston be able to recruit John Tamahiri to New Zealand First, that would be a very big score for Winston. However, I'm not convinced now that the populist parties of the right will necessarily get much of a showing next year.
Right.
I think right-wing populism grows strong, paradoxically, under a strong conservative government, because those who, for whatever reason, feel left out of the success, of the political success which is manifested in a conservative government, are often the first recruits to the fringe parties of the right. However, when that success is bleeding away and all the running has been made on the left, that's when the smaller parties of the right, tend to see their fortunes dwindle. I guess it's just the mirror image of what happens on the left. I mean, as people realise that you're on the losing end of this particular cycle, the numbers fade, the chances disappear.
Yeah.
I think if we are indeed in that moment that Selwyn described of the ship departing from the dock, then I think Winston and Colin Craig will have to look to their laurels seriously to hold on.
Selwyn, what policy wins could Key offer to keep his allies afloat?
He'll play up the moderate policies now. He'll look for solutions. You can see, while the national-led government has been reticent to engage with the recommendations coming through from the OECD reports, the most recent, for example, in June, where it's suggesting a recommendation of capital gains tax, a realignment of the domestic economy, the structures, all of there. It's saying that New Zealand needs to re-engage, get those school leavers, that age from school leaving up to, say, 28, back into the workforce. And as the OECD economists say, it's wasted potential, basically, there. That New Zealand is missing its chance. Now, National has been reticent to engage on those points. It's been one very much of hands-off government on those. In most recent weeks, we've seen a little bit of a trying to tweak that recommendation relating to getting people back into work. There's been a little bit of money here about getting training schemes going again, etc., etc.
No.
But it is not going on the fundamentals of the recommendations. Labor, on the other hand, is. John Key has got to counter that. Making a big song and dance about the little bits of gains in hands-on government that it is starting to display is not going to cut it with the people who know that these problems are hitting them and they need solutions. John Key is short on solutions.
Final question to both of you. If the opposition win come 2014, it could pronounce the political deaths of ACT, United Future and the Māori Party. Will that see a bigger tent National Party in 2017, or do you think something else will emerge on the right?
It will be very interesting because we haven't had that situation for a very long time in New Zealand. I mean, the rise of neoliberalism fractured the old parties to begin with, and that in turn gave us MMP, and so there has been always a reasonable spread of political parties right across the spectrum. If the right loses viable political parties to that extent, where only National is a contender, I'm not sure what that bodes for National's future. One possibility is that the disputes which were dispersed into alternative political organisations will return to the mothership, as it were.
Right.
And that could be quite problematic for National.
You know, what you're saying there, Chris, is something I remember in an interview that I did with David Longy as he exited Parliament, and so around 1996, I think it would have been, just on the eve of MMP coming in. He felt that in the 21st century, under MMP, we would see a return back to the main parties of these various groups. Now, in some ways, you can see that occurring. For example, if you look at the right, you look at National, and you look at where ACT once occupied the space on the right-hand side of the economic spectrum. It is pretty much been absorbed into the National Party, and where ACT remains, National Party controls that through one of its social conservatives. So, you know, we're seeing that
Could
kind of
perhaps
movement happen.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight. Thanks to wall-to-wall media coverage of the America's Bloody Cup, you might not have noticed that there are local elections going on. What are the issues in Auckland? Selwyn, the City Rail link keeps getting held up as the holy grail, but the reports point out that even if it does gain all the money it needs, traffic gridlock will be worse in 2030 than it is now. If the best case funding scenario will produce worse outcomes than we have now, doesn't that suggest that the debate has been pathetic to the point of non-existent?
Yeah, there are some arguments that suggest that's the case, and it also underscores too how this debate should have occurred 10 years ago, if not 20 years ago, if not 30 years ago, when Dove Moore Robertson was around. You know? So, you know, this is, but what we're dealing with is here and now. So you can't rely on one success, like Len Brown's campaign and what they've achieved relating to the rail aspects of their campaign from the last election. There have been some gains, but who trusts, if National was still in 2017, whether or not they're going to cough up the loot that's required to actually get the solution rolling. So you need a coordinated transport approach if you're looking at transport. I like some of the aspirational goals that are coming through from all of the contenders in this mayoralty, for example, where they're starting to talk about the necessity of having rail links and a rail line actually working properly from up in Albany and beyond, coming down.
Chris, if Len Brown wins, it will be off the back of one of the most limp, lacklustre campaigns Auckland has ever seen. Can you really become mayor of New Zealand's largest city without discussing any real policy and a TV advert using a Deep Forest soundtrack?
Well, yes, you can.
Right.
Quite clearly you can, because this mayor is going to be re-elected probably on a landslide. But sadly, probably off a very low turnout. But you cannot get away from the fact that Len Brown has positioned himself politically with such success that no credible contender from the right is either willing or feels able to challenge him. Now, when you're in that sort of situation, I'm afraid even Deep Forest becomes a viable choice.
Question to both of you. Will this mayoralty race be won by apathy or ignorance? Which one?
Gee, I don't know if it comes into both. I mean, I'd like to think that it will be... Well, how can you answer that? I mean, it's just, my mind's gone into crazy realms I don't want to go to.
Chris?
It's not ignorance, and there will be a considerable amount of apathy, but the apathy will be generated, in fact, by the knowledge that the guy is going to win.
Right.
What he said. What I've been waiting for is the National Party and the CNR's endorsement for Len Brown's campaign. You know, an all but gesture.
That's right. A last minute and sudden surge to John Minto has been detected.
Exactly. And Generation Zero voting Len up in an A minus, I think, putting John Minto's thing down in the Bs. That is remarkable, and I kind of wonder who's been seducing this Generation Zero pack. It's crazy stuff.
Well, they want to get that congestion cleared up so that their hybrid Lexuses can get to the shadow puppets.
There's a lot of very
quickly.
clever people in Generation Zero, and
right.
I think maybe the methodology needs to be looked at.
Question to both of you, final question on this. Have the media let local democracy down with their pitiful coverage?
I think they have, but it's not just the editors of today, really. It's the editors of the last 20 or 30 years. Local government in New Zealand is essentially small scale, parochial. People know the issues essentially. Newspapers like the Otago Daily Times, to a lesser extent the press, can give these contests a real local flavour. The problem that New Zealand has now is the Auckland super city, a vast conurbation with huge implications in terms of its size and its power for the whole of the New Zealand economy and New Zealand society. It really needs much more scrutiny than it's getting.
So?
Yeah. once again what he said. You know, I mean, to me, the Auckland super city has not got media representation beyond where the New Zealand Herald is positioned. We once had in the 1990s a very strong newspaper network in suburban newspapers where I was a part of it. You wrote a lead story and you had a double-page investigation inside and you really opened it up. It's a sad parody of what it once was, and I'm sorry to those hard-working journalists that are inside there trying to make something of it. You know, and salute to them. But the winds of change have gone against them. That is a big problem here, and I think, you know, the New Zealand Herald is torn. It's a national newspaper, it's one of international significance as well, and it's trying to actually cover these types of things, and then you get a rollover of populist type issues like America's Cup. Who's going to win in that?
That's right, that's right. Let's wrap the show with the final word. Chris, your final word this week is?
Well, it's gotta be the America's Cup. I know that it's fashionable for lefties to be all down on the America's Cup, but I just want to salute both teams. Salute particularly the New Zealand effort. For those who say that spending $30 million was a bad idea, I have this only to say. For day after day, millions of people around the world, not as many as watch soccer, that's for sure, but an awful lot of people have seen two extraordinary pieces of technology racing on San Francisco Harbour, and the names that come up again and again is Team USA and Team New Zealand. And for my money, $30 million of it, that's great advertisement for
I
New
suppose
Zealand.
on the money front I've been highly critical myself about, you know, the priorities of spending, put it that way, but we could say that the National League government could have saved some money by not destroying foreign affairs and, and at a cost of almost the same amount. Yes. But on that point, I think my final word, Bomber, is on New Zealand's pitch for the United Nations Security Council. John Key has currently been going around some of the significant leaders. They're in a position where it's almost a nightmare in my respect. John Key's justification for a potential loss and being able to get on that Security Council is they haven't got the money like the Turkish government has and the Spanish government has to deploy for this. Forget that. That's nonsense. If New Zealand does not get there, it is because it has not convinced the BRIC countries, Brazil, India, Russia and China, that it is that independent broker. New Zealand needs to rethink where it's positioned with the United States. Sure, like David Cunliffe said, the United States is a good friend of New Zealand, but being in its pocket and being considered a sycophantic satellite of its wishes is not going to get you those gains at foreign affairs level.
Thank you, Selwyn. Thank you, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. Let's be 1,000% honest, shall we? National standards never were about lifting educational achievement. They are there to create league tables to inject a false competition model into education, and alongside charter schools with their unregistered teachers are a blatant attempt to devalue teachers to save costs. It is an ideologically driven fantasy to dismantle the highly unionised teaching profession. New Zealand has one of the best public education systems in the world, and where it fails is with children decimated by the reality of poverty. Rather than deal to the causes of that poverty and its impact on educational standards, John Key and the national government want to implement a right-wing experiment under the guise of educational achievement, simply to save dollars long term while helping out their mates in private education short term. How private military charter schools and teaching creationism with unregistered teachers is supposed to be the cure-all to educational achievement is one of the great mysteries of the 21st century. Education has 99 problems. Hekia Parata and this government are about 98 of them. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.